Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Actual American people are basically just kind of stumbling along, trying to figure out the best course of action for them individually in the context of their proximity to or distance from this hideous sort of tentacled source of power. And it's kind of touching in a bleak sort of way to watch people just find their route, given where they are, for what's going to make them and their family sane. And some of those people have been infected with brainworms, and so they believe that what they must do is wear 5 masks. And some of those people are a little bit woker and realize, woker in our sense, they realize that the regime is not their friend, and so they're acting accordingly. But the sort of governing theme, it seems to me, is that there is an enemy of the people in the White House running our institutions, and people are suffering under the consequences of that, with more or less protection depending on which state they live in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Roundtable, the official podcast of the editors and publisher of The American Mind, although in this case it's only the editors podcast because we kicked the publisher out. Occasionally we grow power hungry and we topple statues of Ryan outside the Claremont offices and take over. I'm Spencer Clavin. I'm the features editor of The American Mind and the associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I'm joined today by founding editor Matthew Peterson, and in his triumphant return from book writing, emerging, blinking into the sun, manuscript in hand, as he told us over Slack, James Poulos, executive editor of The American Mind. We're all very excited to read his work and also excited to have him back. The theme of today's podcast is 2 rival armies gathering their forces. There are a number of areas in which this seems to be the case. It's been a week of conflict intensifying and tension brewing. The major news story, which is what we'll start off with today, but it will hopefully lead us into a range of other things. As of this taping, the news story that I'm seeing most prominently on my Twitter feed and in my news app is this new set, this report of the investigation into allegations of sexual harassment by Governor Andrew Cuomo. This comes out of the Office of the Attorney General. Letitia James, well known or at least widely suspected of wanting Cuomo's job in 2022, releases an utterly damning report of various claims, allegations about Governor Andrew Cuomo really just acting like a big old creep. There's a bunch of these reports from different women who report Cuomo's misconduct. The one that really grabbed me was one of the first ones from executive assistant number 1. Her offensive interactions, among others, culminated in an incident at the executive mansion in November 2020 when the governor, during another close hug with executive assistant number 1, reached under her blouse and grabbed her breast. You can read a litany of these if you really want to on the Attorney General's website. But it fits into another theme, which is this kind of crack up or catastrophe in blue states. Things get worse and worse in blue states. We're rolling toward a recall in California. Governor Gavin Newsom, September 14th is the date set for that vote, which will have 2 stages. One, do you want to recall Gavin Newsom? And then if the answer turns out to be yes, who do you want to replace him? Frontrunners include Jenner and Larry Elder has stepped into the race. But, we have a feature about this up on AmericanMind.org called California Crack Up, just the disasters that are unfolding in California as kind of emblematic of these one-party rule blue states where progressive policies are allowed to have the disastrous consequences that they have when you let them loose. In San Francisco, the DA, Chesa Boudin, I guess I can never pronounce that, defended
shoplifter who sort of waltzed into Walgreens. This is happening all over these cities, and people are fleeing them en masse. We've known this for some time, but this is held in contrast now to red state governors, especially Ron DeSantis, but elsewhere in other red states. The kind of dichotomy in the opposition is coming into focus underneath the madness and dysfunction of the Biden administration, which obviously is more sympathetic toward the blue states, although Biden did call rather impotently for Cuomo's resignation. I doubt that he will step down. I'm unsure about whether he's even going to get voted out, although it seemed possible that he'll be replaced by somebody woker and more progressive. It's a shame we don't have Seth Barron, our managing editor, around to talk about this, but he's told me that he thinks that there's really nothing that could unseat Cuomo, or at least cause him to step down voluntarily. Guys, this is a crystallizing moment. I think we're starting to see how these different states are approaching the various challenges in front of us. Any major takeaways for you from this stage of the proceedings about which states look stronger, prospects for 2022 or 2024?
Well, I think, the signs are that the same machine that swung into action last time around is gearing up for more fun. So due to the Delta variant, quote unquote, California's recall election will be done through mail-in ballot. And it's just clear that that the powerful interests in virtualizing as much of politics as possible are busily, hungrily looking for opportunities to push that reset, if you will, into the very intimate details of our political lives. You don't really need to attribute the most nefarious possible motives to people in order to understand this. Every major country in the world is confronting a wave of disenchantment through the peoples of the world who are starting to question basic things because their rulers created technology that now is more powerful than the rulers themselves. And so anyone confronted with that problem of statecraft has to figure out a way as quickly as possible to reestablish a social contract, to reestablish a degree of political authority and control that is good enough to keep them in power and has at least some pretense of showing how human beings can remain in charge in an automated world. Different countries are trying different things. We've seen this in China and Russia, India, Israel, elsewhere. Each one of those countries is what some folks would call a civilization state. And it seems to me clear that, if you're trying to find a way to create a new form of digital statecraft that can hack this present moment, then you've got to rely on the resources that are the most venerable and durable among your people. And that oftentimes means religion. America is a special case in a couple different ways, much more fundamentally pluralistic in a salutary way than other countries. And we, warts and all, we do pluralism better than other places, which is something that is a bit of a paradox. Maybe we can talk about that more if we feel like it. But, there's just unity through uniformity is really not the American way, in spite of the fact that Americans are oftentimes big proponents of conformity. For reasons of social pressure. Social pressure has always been a factor here, wanting to, understand what the mood or the spirit of the people is and to reflect it yourself has always been an obsession to a degree. And so the challenge of digital statecraft for our current ruling class is pushing them in a direction that is just really not compatible with our form of government. We've seen, the CDC throwing its weight around this week with the eviction stuff. And the Biden administration basically just daring the Supreme Court to do something about it. We've seen New York and now LA and probably other cities by the time this goes to air, trying to pass some rule or another of questionable legality that would force people who hope to go inside of buildings to present vaccine certificates. This is the effort that the regime is making to reset America on a footing that is capable of carrying us through the digital transition. It just happens to be a footing that, I don't think it is tenable in this country. I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. And it is alarming to see, but it also raises serious questions about, how weak is this regime that this is what they think their best shot is at moving forward.
Yeah, first I apologize for my sound. I have a crappy mic because I lost my wire. Producer Jake has scolded me already for that. And there's dogs barking here and lawnmowers at the same time. So hopefully you won't hear that. If you do, deal with it. To Spencer's question, it really is Chesa Boudin. Chesa Boudin is the proper pronunciation of the name of the DA in San Francisco, who is a complete lunatic.
Condolences to him.
But he knows what he's doing. I think with what James is saying, I mean, to add to that, we're in a situation where it's very clear what people have, the route that our ruling class has decided to go. And, you see fits and starts since Biden took office, a few moments of hesitation maybe, but it's very clear the direction in which the momentum goes. And it's the way in which, of course, we've talked about, if you've listened to us for the last year, it is maximum overdrive, regardless of the psychology behind it. I mean, it definitely is maximum action all the way up to 11, pushing. And in the midst of this, you have these very interesting battles going on at the state level. So when it comes to the CDC, when it comes to New York and the vax mandates and all of this, I mean, you see it. The facts don't matter. The actual numbers of death with Delta don't matter. And increasingly, they matter even less. Like the fig leaf matters even less. And they're going to keep pushing until there is no fig leaf. I don't think there is now, but there's still excuses. Biden is going to propose something that he thinks is unconstitutional out loud in public, but he's going to push it forward anyway, right? I mean, that's kind of where we're at. So it's naked. I mean, the emperor wears no clothes. And in the midst of that, the question is, how are Americans going to respond? And if you use this kind of maximum cultural and political overdrive, all the way turned up for so long, when do things start breaking down? And I would submit we're going to find out very soon. We're now at the point at which a lot of these things are going to become particular sticking points between actual governments and people on the ground. It's not just intellectual anymore. So when you see Ron DeSantis stand up and basically say, over my dead body, which he did the day of this recording, told Biden, you have to come through me if you're taking these tyrannical measures. I mean, this is not going to just be talk anymore. And then things are going to get interesting because these forces are going to conflict. And I mean, in the midst of this, what seems really apparent is the way in which anyone who stands up seems to terrify them. They become obsessed with anyone who stands up to them. And I think that's a sign of what James is saying, that there's a certain weakness behind this. They really don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to deal with the situation. They don't even know, in a way, at a deeper level, what that situation is, what's causing it, what's driving it. They don't think about these sort of things explicitly, talking about digital technology and whatnot, AI and the bots, like James says. I mean, most people aren't even thinking about that at all. If they are, they're thinking of it in terms of a kind of control with a kind of arrogance that gets you into trouble very quickly. And so when you look at what's happening, I mean, every week these things are accelerating. Every week things get worse. But we're now moving into a situation where we are going to see actual conflict between various forces. And we're really going to start to test how strong this regime is. And I think that feeling you feel when you watch the news and you get sick to your stomach, right, that everyone's had for a long time if they've been paying attention. Well, I think that we're in phase 2 now. We're going to see some actual conflict.
Yeah, there's this account. Well, it's not an account. It's a person who has a great Twitter account, Walter Kern. And he's at Walter Kern. And recently he said something that I found rather intriguing. He said, that lockdown part 2 is kind of like, the Soviet missile that they, if they use it, it'll probably be the end of everything. But also they kind of have to use it because if they don't, it's the end of everything. And this thing now where we're flirting with, and it's been apparent for months that we were going to use this Delta variant as the thinnest possible pretext for flirting with more mandates, more lockdowns, more masks, vaccine. The sort of like sequel version is that these vaccine mandates that there's already one in New York. They're floating it in Los Angeles as of this recording. They really do need to be able to do this because by every actual objective measure, they're failing catastrophically. I mean, the border crisis gets worse and worse. The economy is not coming back anywhere near in the way that it should, in part, because of these, atrocious Biden measures and just these endless government handouts that keep people from going back to work, all of this stuff, which if people were paying attention to the reality of things would be a terrible indictment of the Biden administration and of these blue state governments. They must have lockdowns to fix it all. And the reasons for that at a structural level are exactly as James indicates. There's a kind of crisis of authority in the digital age. There's a crisis really of rulership, who and how is going to rule. And it's been intriguing to watch these mandates, these proclamations, none of which, it should be noted, are constitutional. I mean, the eviction moratorium is really an amazing one that Biden, who had said already that he thought this was he didn't have the power to do this, effectively extended this eviction moratorium where you can't kick people out if they don't pay their rent. As far as I can tell, that effectively makes the federal government, into the arbiter of property rights and able to simply snap its fingers and abolish sort of just the ability to own things, which is fundamental to the American regime. It's completely unconstitutional to begin with, and now it's been extended in a way that even the people doing the extending admit is unconstitutional, right? And so it's been intriguing to watch the way that these diktats kind of trickle into different areas in different states. So in places like New York and Los Angeles, it's clear that they just immediately, they're part of the regime. They're, that whatever it is that you want to call it, our ruling class, our sort of sclerotic elite, anything, any word you want to give to it, lives in these blue state governments just as much as it currently lives in the White House. And then you have places like out here in Nashville, for example, where it's sort of surreal because, it's a red state, obviously, but we're a light blue city, and everything kind of teeters on the brink, even from county to county, region to region. And it's kind of surreal to walk through like a Kroger or a grocery store and hear over the intercom the announcement of the official regime being made. You must wear your mask even if you're vaccinated, and see people ignoring it, right? I mean, thankfully, blessedly, people at present at least are kind of immune. So they're just so worn out by the uselessness and the contradictory nature of these mandates that they're starting to just ignore it, even in kind of bluer areas like the one where I live. And then, of course, you have actual bastions, holdouts, where the leadership, the DeSantises of the world, have simply planted their feet and said, you're letting people stream into the country, do your job, fix the border crisis, and before then, I don't want to hear a peep from you, Biden, about COVID, right? This is an amazing kind of ranging of different battle lines, and people are actual American people are basically just kind of stumbling along, trying to figure out the best course of action for them individually in the context of their proximity to or distance from this hideous sort of tentacled source of power. And it's kind of touching in a bleak sort of way to watch people just find their route, given where they are, for what's going to make them and their family sane. And some of those people have been infected with brainworms, and so they believe that what they must do is wear 5 masks. And some of those people are a little bit woker and realize, woker in our sense, they realize that the regime is not their friend, and so they're acting accordingly. But the sort of governing theme, it seems to me, is that there is an enemy of the people in the White House running our institutions. And, people are suffering under the consequences of that with more or less protection, depending on which state they live in.
I just say quick to that. I mean, yeah, the question that keeps on coming up for me is, to what extent does it matter? I mean, take the quantum pill, right? I mean, you can say, on one hand, resistance is rising. There's going to be real conflict now in the courts and politically in a way we haven't seen before, because they're actually pushing up into state governments and pushing everything they've done. So, and Trump is out of the picture. So now you got moderates who are going to have to deal with this. Even Democrats in many places are getting upset and not obeying the rules. On the other hand, there's just something Soviet about that, where everyone just rolls over and accepts this is the way it is. And it's interesting to me, like the border is another good example. Does Joe Biden need to say anything about the border? I mean, do they just mouth some platitudes and hundreds of thousands of people come in? I mean, why not open it even more? I mean, do they really need an excuse or an argument? I don't think so. And so, the question is, another way to put it is, are these little islands that are holding out going to be able to stand long enough to form some kind of larger scale resistance? And can Republicans accomplish that?
One question I have for you guys is whether the sort of current inaction is like too gentle a word, but the rolling over of Republicans in Congress is going to have electoral consequences for them. I mean, this infrastructure bill, I think, has 17 Republican signees. I need to check that to make sure it's right. But, there are what you might call collaborators who are complicit in this regime. And even just to watch, the Biden regime abolish property rights and hear not a peep from the people that we look to really, I mean, like, where is Mitch McConnell in all of this? Somebody whom I've been a fan of, but in the past, but now he's out here saying, you must be vaccinated in order to participate in normal life. That just, the totalitarian slide of our kind of monoparty. One wonders whether this is going to be something that people will actually react to and be able to react to in a meaningful way. One of the interesting things is that it's all happening, and perhaps this is part of the digital dimension of all of this. It's all happening so quickly that none of these decisions are being made even with any input. They're all being made before the people have any sort of official channel of input, besides just civil disobedience, besides just refusing to comply. And I do wonder, whether you guys feel as if this will, I am thoroughly quantum pilled on this, I guess is the way to put it. I find myself ricocheting back and forth, or even just kind of existing in a steady, stable state of, wow, I look around me and people really seem to be fed up with this. It doesn't seem to be partisan. It seems as if there are just, folks trying to live their lives who simply are not ready to keep their kids in front of a computer for another year, or mask up in the grocery store again, or, get a 12th booster shot to prepare against the new Lambda variant. And then at the same time, I just see the, tremendous power of this regime. I see it tightening. It seems as if sometimes it seems to me as if 2022 is far, far too late. And that between now and then, there's so much that can be done to actually structurally erode our form of government, if it isn't already gone, that I am tempted to despair. I don't know if you guys are in the same position or what your assessment of it is.
Well, there's sort of this unfair dynamic where if you are in charge, you can transform the regime, and that's not a revolution. But if you are outside of the regime and your regime tries to transform your country, you can't do anything because that would be bad. You can't fight the government in that way, and that's just kind of a structural feature. I mean, there's going to be an overhaul of America one way or the other, and there must out there be some most good faith like regime sort of simp. That person exists somewhere, and that person would say like, look, this is really awkward, and certainly not all of it is perfect, and hopefully this is just the beginning of a very long process of trying to like scrape America back together and get it on its feet. But we are witnessing the collapse of all these kinds of institutions. And if we don't want to have like total chaos, and if we don't want to crash the value of the dollar, and if we don't want to, weaken America internally so much that our enemies start to pile on, then we need to just kind of take crazy dramatic action and throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and hope that it sticks. And so, when I see that portrait of FDR hanging in the Biden White House, I mean, I think this is the sensibility. This is, oops, it melted down. And so now we just kind of need to concentrate all of the power in as few hands as possible and try to just see us through. That is, there is some precedent for that. And sometimes things get so bad that that's just what's going to happen anyway. And it's kind of the luck of the draw of who is at the wheel at that moment. But the problem is that the people in charge lack the most basic credibility to pull this off. And if they evinced greater credibility, if Americans had more confidence in their leadership, more confidence and trust in their motivations, if these weren't just the same clowns who have been like systematically screwing everything up over the past 20 years, missing major geopolitical event after event, attempting major reforms and overhauls, only to see them fall flat, everything from privatizing Social Security to No Child Left Behind. I mean, it's an interminable list. It's a list that's so long that people forget what's on the list. But what they haven't forgotten is that the folks in charge have not passed like the basic tests of competency in statecraft for generations now. And these are the folks that we're supposed to trust with an emergency overhaul in process of the America that they built. There's David Brooks comes out in the Atlantic. Oh, the Bobos messed up and we must now blame them. And it's like, bro, some of us have been blaming the Bobos for the past 20 years. Now is not the time to blame them. The time to blame them is in the distant past, and more serious consequences are needed. You cannot just continue to let these people be in charge and just throw blame at them. That's what has defined American politics for the past 20 years, is one half of the country going, you suck, and the other half going, we don't suck. And then here we are. That's not good enough. So, I understand that yes, like statecraft is difficult. And, as George W. Bush infamously said in that debate with John Kerry, being president is hard, and it is hard. And I get it. And I don't begrudge anyone's good faith effort to kind of, stop the wheels from falling off the wagon. On the other hand, several wheels are off the wagon, down the road, off the cliff. Choose your metaphor. And the people who are taking extraordinary action in an incredibly sloppy and injudicious way that calls into question the most basic principles on which our form of government has been founded. It would be negligence as a citizen to just go, okay, cool, let's see what happens. We cannot trust them to deliver the goods. We can't trust them. They might be lizard people. We can't trust them. They might be evil. The trust gap has to do with competence, and the competence is wanting. And every day we see another example of just how incompetent their behavior is. And then you get into the motives beyond that, and that's a separate conversation. And we know that many of these folks are incompetent because they believe that they have a degree of ethical purity that washes away the sins of incompetence. Shoot first, ask questions later. Overhaul the regime first, and we'll sort it out afterwards. That's not good enough for Americans, and there's going to be pushback one way or the other.
Yeah, let's talk about some of that pushback. And I think the quantum pill is right. Instability held in a stable manner, a stable instability within one's own. So the positive side, to look on the white pill side of that, who's running now? And I get what Spencer is saying. It seems like by 2022, and the elections, is that long enough? And is that too long of a time given what's going on? There's going to be a lot of crazy things that happen between now and then, but we should note that there are some people running who are in fact calling into question in a bolder way than really anyone's ever seen, and no one's really paying attention to it because the National Party can't really frame this as a new movement because of its own problems. But there is a new movement on the right, and you should realize that. So if I look at JD Vance today on Twitter, who's running for Senate in Ohio. He retweets the fact that the city of McAllen, Texas, says the federal government has released over 7,000 COVID positive migrants into the city. Of course, many thousands more came in, but at least 7,000 who had COVID since February. And his line about it is, our country is run by people who hate it. Now that's pretty radical, right? I mean, he's calling it out. He's saying these leaders hate you, and that's the explanation for this. Blake Masters, running in Arizona for Senate, yesterday someone told him, Reagan supported the pathway to citizenship too. Essentially, why aren't you like Reagan on immigration? And Blake just said outright on Twitter, he said, yeah, the 86 amnesty was a mistake. We were supposed to secure the border and end illegal immigration, and that's what we negotiated for, and it didn't happen. Lesson learned is his line. There's a few others out there as well that are worthy of mention who are saying things that you just normally would not hear anyone running for office say. Joe Kent, running for Congress in the Pacific Northwest, is saying things like, look, the GOP leadership in the House stabbed President Trump in the back when they decided to fund impeachment voters. We need to put America first and vote out the rhinos, right? He's on War Room with Bannon talking about BlackRock, preying on the working class. And there's many other examples besides. So I do think that, and there's also sleepers, right? People running who, once they get in office, may very well become new heroes and leaders. Now, I don't put a lot of faith or stock in the U.S. Congress. Obviously, Congress itself is broken. It can't really pass anything other than large omnibus bills. But at the same time, it's notable that there really are people out there saying things that are extremely different. And this isn't seen as a new movement yet, but you can take it to the bank that over the next year, you're going to see all kinds of articles, calling them all, of course, fascists and Nazis, but you're going to see all kinds of articles about this as a new movement that's rising as Trump has receded into the background. And this is a movement that makes its bones on explicitly recognizing the regime level crisis, the incompetence and malice of the elites, and says, vote for me, I can do better.
Okay, this is a perfect springboard, an opportunity to introduce another element, a dimension of this growing, gathering conflict that we've been talking about. And that is the kind of effort to characterize, or I should say delegitimize, this new movement as anti-American, as unacceptable in polite discourse, as outside the Overton window. This is a well-known tactic of our legacy media, which is effectively an enforcement arm or a propaganda arm of the ruling class regime. But it seems to have recently kicked into a certain form of hyperdrive. And I suppose that's just, what's happening to everything right now. But this goes kind of all the way up and down the quote unquote respectability spectrum. So you have people writing articles about how DeSantis is a murderer and Vance is a fascist, and all the guys that you just mentioned, Matt, are not to be accepted, not to be trusted, not to be allowed anywhere near seats of power. But then you have Bronze Age pervert, somebody we've followed before, not because we are 100% on board with his project, but because we found him an interesting dimension that was galvanizing a lot of people on the right, a lot of kind of right-wing bodybuilder types and that sort of thing. He's been kicked off of Twitter. I think he's been blocked, but he had an enormous following and was gathering more every day. Now he's gone. We're part of this. The Claremont Institute is part of this. I don't know where we fall on the respectability spectrum, but we've been following for a while this kind of steady stream, this gradual drip of hit pieces that came first out of the Bulwark and the sort of, never Trumper so-called right, the domesticated opposition, whatever you want to call it. But now it's, they've provided a list of talking points, essentially. It seems to be what has happened for our enemies. And that's kind of obviously what it was designed to do, is designed to, hold us up as this kind of, they're the bad guys, they're the bad right. Now, please give us a place as your lapdogs in the coming regime. And, Mike Anton, who's often a focus of these sorts of things, likes to say that the Bulwark exists to give aid and comfort to the worst enemies of America. It seems he's been proven right. Here's a Vox piece, The Anti-American
right. And this basically accuses us of being the seat of right-wing fascism. And the reason for this is that we don't like Simone Biles. I mean, I'm almost not joking about this. The idea is essentially that part of our critique of the ruling class is that they have hijacked the institutions that James has been outlining. Those institutions are cratering. The leaders of this sort of one-party leading ruling class are thoroughgoing failures for nigh on several decades now. And so, yeah, we have a lot of criticisms of the way that America is currently run. This makes us anti-American because we're essentially anti-progressive, anti-woke. A grand irony, of course, given that we believe, and I think rightly, that we, in fact, defend the American regime as founded, and we are among a perilous few doing so. But all of this I raise only to say that, we, Claremont Institute and J.D. Vance and Ron DeSantis have this in common, which is that we are viewed as a threat to the tightening grip of the regime. We're one of the few people out here who are actually here to say, that this is unacceptable, and we are going to fight politically to stop it from happening. In all of our conversation thus far about how the regime is cracking down on such people, we have not yet talked about the delegitimization campaign, just the way in which the rhetoric is crafted to make it seem as if these sorts of things may not even be thought, right? The sort of hallmark of Newspeak is that if you can define away legitimate opposition into something that is not acceptable to even say or utter or think about, then you've gained complete control over your citizenry. Is that too histrionic a way of putting this, you guys? Have I just worked myself up into a rhetorical froth, or is there something really sinister going on here in the kind of wholesale media push that's going on to attack us, to attack Vance, to attack even guys like Bronze Age Pervert?
Well, I mean, the froth is the objective here. The people who are pushing these narratives are non-essential personnel. They do not bring to the table ideas and understanding that are capable of comprehending what is happening right now and what has already happened. So, the people writing up these hit pieces, they're really firing every bullet they have in their gun. They don't have any deeper well of intellectual or cultural or theological knowledge from which they can draw. There's no reservoir of wisdom that they are waiting to tap. This is it. This is all that they have to bring to the table. And for journalists in that position, I do feel the pain of the journalist who wishes that things are as they once were, and that the news could be what it once was, and that the communications control system in America was less chaotic and structured in a way that made them feel better about their lives when they woke up every day in the morning. Like, yeah, I get it. It does suck, and it is painful, and it's never a good feeling to look in the mirror in the morning and go, I shot my shot. I have nothing left to contribute. I guess my only recourse is to accuse people who disagree with me of being fascists. That's a sad moment, and I'm sure that it hurts inside to have that realization. But it's happening for reasons, and those reasons militate against what the journalistic class wants to be today, which is a set of unelected political arbiters. They think that their only hope of survival institutionally, really, is to become the officialized source of regime information. That is not the journalism of yore. Even when there were 3 TV stations, it wasn't quite that bad. And that is the play that they are making. And in order to make this play, you would think that they would have to really try very hard to earn people's trust back by demonstrating that they could deliver factual information relevant to the times in which we live. In fact, they're doing the opposite. They are scurrilously smearing people who are staunch and stalwart defenders of America and have been from day one. And I think they're discrediting themselves. I think that they're losing audience, that ever since Trump has more or less left the picture, they've been scrambling to find, a new scapegoat who they can burn in effigy and rally their people with. And they can't find one. And they can't find one because there isn't one. There is no horrible enemy lurking out there that needs to be dragged into the light and ceremonially destroyed. There are freaks of every description running around in America. Yes, that's true. And yes, the internet's been very good at giving freaks of every description the opportunity to find each other and identify themselves as a constituency and start making demands on their own behalf. And the ones who are making the most noise and the ones who are having the greatest impact and the ones who are moving us with the greatest force away from America as it has been known more or less from the beginning. It's not people on our side of things. It's people who insist that a woman is not necessarily a woman. It is, people who insist that you are an enemy of the regime unless you've had a certain number of vaccinations and wear a certain number of masks. It is people who genuinely do not have any sort of attachment to long-standing and foundational traditional American norms. They are the ones who are embracing authoritarianism. They are the ones who are promoting authoritarianism, and they are the ones who are saying not only that their flavor of authoritarianism should win the day, but it should win the day because it is morally pure and good. What is the ordinary American supposed to do with that kind of information? It is not essential in any way to making sense of what's going on, other than to understand sort of where the craziness is, where the center of gravity of the craziness is. But it's not actionable intelligence. It's not knowledge worth knowing, and it's not something that'll help them get through the day, much less sort of try to make plans for the future as everything's falling around their heads. That's what we're doing, and that's why we have a growing audience. And this is really just the beginning of this process, I guess. And we're prepared for it, and they're not, and it shows.
Yeah, in terms of what's happened to them, it's been at least since the beginning of the Russian collusion, where I felt like things had changed. The media has always been biased, as the right used to say. Which is really just to say that they're operating along a certain line with a certain point of view, like you have to have in order to speak about anything. And that's always been against the right for a long period of time. But this notion of just full bore for the regime is the only way to fly, I think that's increased as the oligarchy has sort of become one, or seen that they're all tied together, not in some conspiratorial sense, but just in terms of globalized interests. So there's certain policies that spread over time. Tucker Carlson's book is actually, for the kind of thing it is actually pretty decent about this, just describing how the left becomes the party of the elites and the uniparty, the kind of establishment sort of thing, which is just societies have different structures and certain economies. And you could see, gradually the financial structures becoming larger. They're all moving in the same direction. They're all dependent upon the same kind of models. And that starts to make people's interests move and march in the same direction, so that you can have a Jeff Bezos, right, buying the Washington Post. And that makes sense. It's not the fact that the press marches for the sake of a corporate and then establishment view or administrative state view of government, that it all became one, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think this crystallized with the Russian collusion story, because you really had something that was so outrageous, was clearly being fed by the IC and never amounted to anything. And it was just, the constant drumbeat. And that's kind of the overarching. There was some stuff before, some stuff after, but that was kind of the way they were going to play it became obvious then. And at that point, you really saw you're taking a national issue where half the country disagrees with you, and you're operating with a kind of outrageous, plot concocted in a half-assed way by various people in the IC and in politics. And so, so here we are, and they can't get away from this. This is who they are now, as they would say. And so it's in their interest to look for enemies, as they are, as James was saying, and just attacking us. And anyone who disagrees is a fascist and a racist, Nazi, of course. And that's just the way it is. So they're committed, and that's the good thing. And I feel bad for the people who are on that ship, because no matter what happens, that ship particularly is going to sink. I mean, in the direction it's going is one way, it's down. The ratings are down. No one wants to hear it anymore. And if you want to do this, you will end up like the loudspeaker, like the voice in the loudspeaker in the store that Spencer was talking about, blaring the mantras of the regime with no one paying attention to you. And in that case, you're going to need, right, a state or corporate sponsorship just to blare out propaganda that no one cares about. Now, that could happen, right? Because in a way that kind of is happening. I think in America, it'd be a little hard to transition to that. You do have to still rake in some money. Someone has to pay for it. But you could easily see this happening just in terms of large companies. Bezos could buy a number of other operations and bleed money out, but it could be worth it to him just to shut up opposition and blare out propaganda, which sucks all the air out of the room for any opposing ideas. But it's not going to be the same model it is now. It's not going to be the model that people are used to, where media corporations, are actually making money and pushing this stuff out. I just don't see that staying the same. And you can see the problems they have now. I mean, in terms of the cable networks, right? It's a disaster for everyone at Fox. This is even I would say, the credibility of the credentialing prestige institutions, you can watch that drip away in real time. This is the path they decided to take. And they're going to reap the benefits of it, as this year drags on. And already, right, trust is lower than it ever has been before in America for the media. Compared to other countries, it's much lower. We recognize we have a third world press, and that's why their attacks don't matter. So the dynamic here is that as they become more shrill, more insane, and in a way more dangerous, right, saying really terrible things about people every day and calling people like us, fascists and racists, whatever, people just don't care. They tune out. And, it's almost a sign of, like, of course they're against you. If they weren't against you, we'd be suspicious. And so their actual power, right, it starts to disappear. And, that's where we're at. I think the question is whether or not there is still room for alternative businesses to actually rake in revenue by providing real service of value to people in terms of media and press. And I think that's the experiment that at New Founding, newfounding.com, we are working on with a number of people. I was just talking to someone today, actually, who's a lot of experience building companies in media and navigating this space, finding the competitive advantage because of the view that everyone else has, right? And the question is whether, given the totalitarian nature increasingly of the government and its collusion with bigger corporations, whether there's room to create a new media. Everyone knows the opportunity is there, right? The question is it just a matter of time before we can bring together the talent and resources to do that, which many of us are trying to do? Or is it the case that even those efforts are doomed to failure because it's really not possible, which is why no one with serious money has even tried to do it since Fox was launched, 30 years ago. And, that's the question. But to me, like the most important thing moving forward is we have to create, this is like the 60s and 70s, right? You had lefty dissent. Those people were the ones on the list. We're the ones on the list now with the cultural energy. And what they were able to do is mainstream those magazines of dissent, right? Make them actually credentialing institutions and prestige institutions for their side that are ultimately bolstered by entities that actually bring in revenue and are for profit. The question is whether the right can do that now. And to me, that's kind of where the battle line is. If we can't do that, I think we're probably SOL. We're out of luck. And, welcome to Hot Gulag Summer.
Yeah.
Gulagflag.com. You should go there and support the American mind while protesting the American regime and host your own party. But that's a joke now, but it's only a half joke. And we have to. There's a lot to do. People like us are actively working on the solutions, right? That's what we do in the nonprofit space with American Mind, and that's what a lot of us are doing in other parts of our lives. And so these clowns yelling at us, calling us names. I mean, it's just death throes. You feel bad for them. They're just going to go down with their ship.
You've set me up for a shameless plug to take us out here, Matt, so thank you for that. But I will actually, on a note of sincerity and not of shamelessness, mention something we've talked about before, which is that as these attacks against us ramp up, one of the things, I mean, really the main way that they seem to be making an impact is that people are paying attention to us in a good way. They see that we are an object of hostility from people who have no other ideas, no other way forward, and they sign up or they follow us on Twitter or they start reading our stuff for the first time. And so, if that's you, or if you're one of the many people who have expressed support for Claremont, defended Claremont against these ridiculous slanderous attacks, just advertised us in the wake of the latest hit piece, thank you. You are doing something really valuable for us, and we believe valuable for the country. We think that we have a role to play in this, in hopefully bringing us through this time of crisis, bringing the country through this time of crisis, with something like regime, its original founding regime, intact or restored or refounded. That's a great reason to go to claremont.org/donate and support us that way, or to check out Matt's venture at newfounding.com. James is also very intimately involved in that. But just, the fact that you're listening to our voices right now, the fact that you're sharing the content that we create, the fact that you're stepping up in support of us against, in some cases, real persecution at your workplace or real danger that you might suffer for expressing support of us, it means the world to us. It's what makes it worthwhile, and it's going to make the difference as we go forward in this gathering conflict. Thank you, that is to say, for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, I've already mentioned you can go to claremont.org/donate, but you can also learn more about all of our projects and writing by visiting our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, claremontreviewofbooks.com. I already said newfounding.com. Matt, is it gulagswag.com for the gulag stuff?
Yeah, and just so people know, I mean, that's not something that's going to make money. That's something that's going to support American Mind when you buy that merchandise. So
yeah, nobody is rolling in the bucks that are coming from that swag.
Yeah, Gulag Swag. It's a great I think hilarious way to kind of protest the regime. And it's designed by our friend Dave Roboy in Miami, which you can almost tell from looking at the Miami Vice nature of it. The other thing we should say too about Claremont as you close is, look, this isn't we're contrary to what these idiots say on the internet. We don't have big corporate backers precisely because we're free. That's why we're free to say these things, precisely because we're not conservatism incorporated. So, small dollar donations and, large dollar donations help us a lot because we're not sitting here with corporate backers and $100 million in the bank like AEI and these other institutions.
Thanks, Matt, for that. Yeah, no, it actually does make a difference every time you click on one of our pages or send us money to support. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks immensely to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And one last time, because we really do mean it, thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week.